fairly creative person, but I have a hard time of thinking of different ways to meet people's needs with the way that they learn. And so even though most of us have heard learning styles lectures before, it's a great opportunity for us to discuss that and to really brainstorm together. Albert Einstein said, "Everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it's stupid." Thought that was a really interesting quote, but it kind of gives that idea of if you try to force somebody to learn a certain way or be good at a certain thing, then they'll live their life believing that they're stupid, that they're not smart. When it could just simply be that the way you're teaching them, they don't relate to. It's not something that sticks out to them. And I wonder how many times as teachers, and some of us probably experienced this in school, if we had the feeling that we were stupid, it was probably because our teacher tried to teach us a certain way. It didn't relate to us, and they kept trying to push that thing, and when we didn't get it, the label came across, well, you're just not one of the smart kids. You're just stupid. This is a quote by a guy named Clifford Morris. "There's a considerable body of research evidence suggesting that many special education students who have been formally categorized, for example, as learning disabled, LD, are in fact not LD students per se, but assessed and taught incorrectly in terms of their dominant learning style. Perhaps a more positive way of describing their LD is that they simply learn differently." They simply learn differently. Albert Einstein had another quote where he was talking about how surprised he was that our modern education system is still functioning the way it is, or that people are still going through school this way, which I thought was very fascinating, coming from an exceptionally smart man. But people learn differently. And so we shouldn't be making judgments. Even as teachers, when we see somebody who maybe isn't getting it or maybe seems that they're slower, our assumption should be, well, maybe they learn differently. Maybe I'm not meeting their need. Now granted, you also do get lazy students or students who just want to be rebellious. But for them, the need that you have is to build the need for what you're teaching in them. And I don't think that's impossible. And I think often by just showing you genuinely care for a student, sometimes that can even bring them out of that. So, modalities of learning, things that you guys know very well: visual, auditory, kinesthetic. For most of you, not all of you, this will be review. But these are different ways that people learn. And I think often kinesthetic can be the most neglected one in school. That's just the natural tendency. And even thinking as a teacher, I think it's sometimes the most challenging one for us to try to meet as teachers, is meeting people who need that kind of kinesthetic atmosphere to learn. I know as a teacher myself, that's often the hardest one that I'm thinking, well, how can I meet the needs of kinesthetic learners? What can I do for that? Because the system of education that we've always grown up in, that's something that's really contrasts the way that the modern education system works. It doesn't often meet kinesthetic things, except maybe in chemistry class, biology class. My physics class was awesome because we'd go build stuff and blow stuff up. And granted, I don't remember a lot from my physics class except making bottle rockets, but it met some kinesthetic needs there. So visual learners. This is the majority of learners. The majority of people you'll have in a classroom are visual learners. And I think this is on the rise due to technology. We have a hard enough time outside of a classroom setting getting people to pull their eyes away from visual stimulation. So even in classrooms, I think this is growing and becoming more dominant. They learn best by visual aids, charts, diagrams, visual presentation. And they study best by watching a process, reading materials, taking notes, or highlighting/underlining using color. How many of you guys underline things using color? Oh, besides color coding.
No, but I do it just on notes and.
Oh, really?
Color code, I
Yeah.
color code a lot of stuff.
That's interesting. I'm kind of inconsistent when it comes to that. Usually in books and things, I just underline with same color pen. Even on my notes, I don't necessarily take different colored notes.
I don't
Ainsley,
usually
very visual in that sense.
Yeah, I don't use color, but I do like things along the side
Mm-hmm.
more than underline.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say color code, I use the same color but different symbols and stuff. Different.
So in preparing lectures, visual learners is definitely something we have to consider because it is a large majority of our audiences. And that is a learning need or a way that people learn well that you definitely want to meet. And something I thought of when I looked at this is how we can do this as preachers. Now we're focusing on teaching, but was it how, and I think Tim agreed with him, that you shouldn't do any kind of that you shouldn't do a PowerPoint when you're preaching, because it's meant to be a conversation. It's meant to seem a little more intimate than that. It's not necessarily a presentation. I thought that was really interesting. And it was kind of challenging in the sense, how do you meet the needs of visual learners without that?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, you could play a video, maybe in the way you speak, drawing pictures in your language, I think would be a huge thing. Of course, if that doesn't come naturally to us, we have to put a lot of effort into trying to speak that way. But I think as preachers, that's something that we need to try to do, because there's a very real need for that. Any comments or questions about visual learners?
I would say taking notes or highlighting also make symbols or like you can add, I put using symbols on it because I'll put like stars next to things.
Mm-hmm. In your notes?
In different types of stars.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, like 1 star for something and then 2 stars for something else and 3 stars for something.
That's super interesting.
So it's also symbols, it's not just colors.
Another thing that could be helpful for visual learners in preaching is really verbalizing the structure. This helps for me when I'm listening to sermons a lot. Because when I'm listening to sermons and I'm trying to take notes, I want to know what their next point is, how their points are flowing. So even just verbally saying, and the next point that I want to make from this passage, and immediately I get that visual and can visually put that in my notes, and it makes it easier to kind of put that picture onto paper for me. So even the way we communicate, we can kind of meet those needs of visual learners. So next you have auditory learners. So around 30% of people are auditory learners. They excel in learning just by solely what they hear. They learn best by verbal lectures, discussions, talking things through, I should say. Not just one thing, lots of things. Listening to the words of others, taping lectures, and playing back. How many of you guys listen to podcasts? A lot. I rarely listen to podcasts. It's just not something that really draws me. Which is interesting because in some ways I feel like I'm a pretty auditory person. But that's just not a real strong way that I learn. Study best by listening in class, discussing information in groups, reciting study notes. And as we go through this, maybe you'll see things that you'll say, that's me. Yeah, that's me. Most of us probably already know kind of where we fall. So, auditory learners, pretty easy in a teaching classroom setting. They're not very hard people to reach. In fact, the way that teaching is, this really comes pretty naturally for teachers. You're pretty good at talking if you feel like you're called to be a teacher. But I think a very huge thing is discussions. Having discussion time. Even if you're just giving them time to talk to the person at their table, giving them an opportunity. You guys all know the phrase verbally process. Some people verbally process. Matt Farrell,
What?
verbal processor.
There you go.
Absolutely. I'm a verbal processor at times.
False.
I've had conversations with people where I've asked them something, if they want to do something, and then at the end said, no, you don't want to do that. Because I processed it through and realized, no, that's not going to work. And they laugh, they're like, why'd you ask me? And I'm like, well, I didn't think it through until I verbally discussed it with you. I can be a verbal processor for sure. But when it comes to taping lectures, playing things back, podcasts, that's not something that I really learned by. I'm not really drawn to that. Any questions or comments on auditory learners? It's pretty common, pretty easy need to meet. But talking things through and discussion times I think are huge. That is an atmosphere that I thrive in when I'm trying to learn things or in school. Having the opportunity to discuss it, to think about it. Next you have kinesthetic learners. This is a smaller portion of learners, but I feel like it's also growing. They learn best by being physically involved, hands-on activities, movement. How many of you guys took PE in high school? I think everyone did. I loved physical education. We had an awesome PE teacher who was very structured. And believe it or not, a lot of people didn't get A's in my PE class.
Wow.
And it wasn't simply you had to be really athletic to get an A in this class. You just had to be involved correctly, follow the structure, be responsible. But PE, loved it. Hands-on activities, love that myself. Movement. Do we have any foot tappers in here? When they're sitting listening, they're always tapping. I'm almost dancing with my feet at times when I'm sitting listening to people, just because I kind of need that movement. Movement helps me focus. And so having people in class who are maybe playing with pens, even doodling, tapping their feet, that's not something that we should be taken back by, because that might be helping them learn and helping them focus. When I was in high school, sometimes on game days, if it was football season or basketball season, I would bring the ball to class and just hold on to it. And it would help me focus. I wouldn't even be bouncing the basketball or anything, I'd just be holding it while listening to lecture, and it would help me focus. And the teachers knew it, so they let me bring the basketball to class. But that was even just a kinesthetic thing of having something in my hands, helped my mind engage more with what the teacher was saying. So yeah, study best by demonstrating movement in their work, exercising while reading, walking while reciting their notes. Does anyone in here do this? I do this all the time. Our New Testament oral exam, I spent 3 hours in the kitchen walking in a circle around the big cutting table inside the kitchen, just reciting my notes. I have to be moving while doing this. That is so different from some people. Some people can't focus on studying if they're moving. And
Actually, just on Sunday when I was getting ready for yesterday, I stood at my bed walking back up and down, and saying it out loud, the lecture, so that I would get it in my head. And I had never done that before, but I really liked it. It really helped me a lot.
Yeah, what are ways, if you guys had to study for a test, what are ways that you'd naturally go to study? Because I think this can also tell us a lot about how we learn, by how we study.
Where or what?
What would you do to be studying for it? Something, for a test. If you're studying for the New Testament oral exam, if you were studying for something else, what is the natural go-to thing for test taking for you?
Write it down.
Ainsley?
Speaking it out. I have to speak it out, but then I have to start drawing out that weird code thing that I do with the pen
Your
and-
NASA code formula
Yeah.
notes.
I
That
have
are
to write
awesome.
it out like that, but I have to speak it out first until I know it, and then I have to write it out.
Hear it and then write it out like that. Okay. What else?
So one task is a bigger test. I'd probably read it first, reread it, then take notes, then formulate patterns.
Or even studying, you're memorizing Philippians.
Mm-hmm.
How have you been doing that?
I read it and write it out and formulate patterns. So
Steve, what about you?
Probably just read it out loud,
Yeah.
and that's it.
That's
So
awesome.
jealous.
Wish, seriously.
that's what
You just
That's awesome.
Just read it out loud once or so,
Once?
and once or twice.
He has an exceptional mind for memorizing things. I took Greek with this guy, and I feel like at times he taught me more than I could have possibly learned by myself. Yeah. Yeah, so for
Very
me,
helpful for
having
you.
Steve as a classmate, that kind of atmosphere helps me thrive. Having classmates, I think Steve could have taken. You took Hebrew by yourself,
Yeah, well,
and you did great. That atmosphere would kill me, because I can't. I have a really hard time learning if there isn't a classroom atmosphere, and so thankfully we had that for Greek. Steve did great in Greek because of that, but I could not. I would not have been able to even begin to grasp that without a classroom atmosphere. It just wouldn't have been possible for me. That's just the way I learn. Matt, what about you studying?
I pace and I talk out loud.
Mm-hmm.
But I do write, like I do the pattern thing when I, for SBS, I would find words that, I don't know, I would kind of say it in a way that, like in a rhythmic, whatever way.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Neat. I am visual kinesthetic for sure. We'll all write our stuff up here. I didn't put a spot for myself, but and one reason I really know that is because for studying for Greek words at times, I would write the word on the board in our classroom, draw a little picture next to it, and then stand on the stool, like stand on it, and rock back and forth while looking at the board trying to memorize it.
Oh my goodness.
It was probably one of the funniest sights that somebody could walk in and see, but it really helped me learn. I was engaging my body and visually seeing things as I was trying to memorize, but
That's crazy.
yeah.
My favorite was in college. I was doing, I think it was a biology exam, and so I brought all of my notes in like little water protective things. I don't know. I brought them to the pool, and then I swim my lengths, and I come back and I read my notes, and then I swim my length.
Huh, that's awesome.
Cool.
That's cool.
That's
That'd be
really
such a
cool.
distraction to me.
Yeah. So last, it's kind of a subcategory of kinesthetic, tactile learners, which I would say I'm probably more kinesthetic than tactile. I really enjoy movement, but when it comes to the little hands-on details, I don't necessarily need that as much as I just need bigger movement. So they learn and study best by hands-on activity, manipulating objects, using flashcards, working problems, retyping, and rewriting notes. How many of you guys rewrite your notes?
Me.
That
Maybe.
I find incredible. And that's I think a great way to learn something, rewriting notes. I wish I did that. So that's really neat. So tactile and kinesthetic people, those are the people that we really have to be creative in how we can engage with them in a classroom setting. I think if you're teaching in an SBS or something like that, that can even be more difficult, because how do you teach the Bible and bring in kinesthetic things and tactile things for your audience? Those are things that we really have to be creative with and really think through ideas of how we can do that. So just going through, just writing down, we'll just do your top 2 ways that you think you learn. I'm not on the list. Oh. I'm definitely visual kinesthetic, visual being probably my strongest way of learning. The way that I put my notes together, even taking notes on my laptop, I'll use clip art all the time. Pull in little clip art. During SBS, I would try to draw the maps while I was taking notes on my lecture on my document so that I had those visuals there. So I'm definitely very visual. And then next would be kinesthetic. movement really helps me, even if it's pacing. Steve, what do you think?
Predominantly auditory.
Auditory?
Yeah. A little bit of kinesthetic, maybe.
Auditory, kinesthetic. Alright, Matt?
Visual and kinesthetic. But I also have a little bit of that tactile. I bought a push ball for SBS.
Say KT. Sarah?
I'm visual, and I wouldn't even put a second.
Just visual.
Yeah.
Big V.
I can be the others, and I can learn through them, but
Mhm.
these just
It's really dominant
Really
compared
dominant.
to anything else.
Okay.
Visual, kinesthetic.
I'm probably more tactile than I mean, I am kinesthetic, but I'm higher than tactile.
Dude, TK.
Okay. Great.
I thought I was kinesthetic, but I think I'm tactile and then visual.
Mm-hmm. Tactile, visual. Neat, that's really neat.
I've never heard of tactile before. I like that. Yeah. And starring what's like me, and all the other ones it's like 1 or 2, and this one's like.
Now this kind of just looks like it's your last name abbreviated or something.
I don't know.
There would be. Well, even in such a small class, we all have pretty different ways. Visual is definitely predominant, which is expected in a classroom setting. And then kinesthetic and tactile. We got Steve rocking the auditory up here, which is awesome.
Yeah.
So even in such a small classroom setting, the ways we learn are so different. And trying to meet those needs is really important as teachers.